Good morning, Ruby.
Good morning.
How are you this morning?
Wonderful. How are you?
Good, thanks. Colin was trying to get on. He just contacted me. And has Michelle joined us yet?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Very good. Good morning, Michelle. Good.
Good morning. Hi. Are we, am I able to turn on my video or? No.
You're promoted to a panelist, so you should be able to.
Okay.
Okay.
And
It says unable to start because the host has stopped it.
yeah, that's the same message I'm getting, Ruby. Welcome, everybody. I see we already have 7 people in this morning. Okay, Colin got on. Good. Yeah.
And it looks like I can share screen. So
That's good.
yeah, so I haven't tried it quite yet, but
All right.
it looks like I can. So.
Oh, good. And we will get started here. I'll do a quick introduction.
Great.
And,
do you all have bad weather there at all?
Well, not as bad as it could have been. Night before last, we were expecting ice into yesterday morning, but it was mostly north of the Durham area.
Okay.
Had a light coating of ice, but nothing that caused any problems. I don't believe. I didn't really hear about any accidents on the roadways, but during COVID, where people aren't traveling as much.
Right. Exactly.
There you are. Now
yes.
I can see.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm like, it's working. Hold on, let me get there.
Good.
Right.
What about you guys up north?
We actually got like some snow and ice, and so last night it froze up, and so my husband and my mother were going to get their second vaccine today. So
nice.
I've been out cleaning off ice off the car, right?
Ooh, okay. Yeah.
To get them ready to go. So it's not, I'm from Michigan, so it's not a lot. So I'm like, but it's enough to make everyone panic here. So
it's all relative, right? Yeah.
Right.
In this area we panicked too. We had about an inch of snow about two weeks ago, and so anyway.
Yeah.
But we'll make it through, and March is just a couple weeks away.
And so exactly. It's going to be summer again before we know it, and hopefully we'll be able to enjoy a bit more of our summer.
And then we'll complain about the heat come summer.
Right.
Let me see. Try to forward this again. Another person says, "Can you send me the Zoom number?" I said, "Well, I really should have gotten it before now, but we will do what we can." Good. We're up to 13 people. Good morning, everyone. Glad you are here. We're going to get started here in a couple of more minutes, 2 or 3 more minutes. One of the things as we begin to gather, and particularly those of you who have joined early, you might want to take a minute to put your name and your position and the name of the organization you work with in the chats. That might help Michelle get an idea of the variety of people who are here and your positions in your organization. We'll offer a reminder, certainly as we begin as well, that we will be recording this session and posting a link to the recording on the durhamcoc.org website so that people in your organizations that may have to do other work today can see it, and as well as if you want to review it as well, you'll be able to do that. Probably give us about a week to get it uploaded. One of the things we're learning on Zoom is to use the capabilities, the functionality of Zoom as best we can. So feel free to use the chat and the Q&A function. Michelle, do you have any preference, or Ruby, do you have a preference as to whether people use the chat or the Q&A function? When we get, we'll have some time for discussion. I think if you do want to contribute orally, probably the best way to do that is to raise your hand. It's on the menu on the bottom of my screen, at least, and as the raise your hand function. I just did that so we can see that. And then when you're recognized, Ruby, do you want to handle recognizing people or asking questions that are in the chat box, or would you like me to do that?
Or I would prefer the chat box so that everyone can see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was gonna say same thing. Yeah, I have that up. And I will stop periodically so that we can look at if there are questions in particular in the chat, we can go ahead and address them. If I go without stopping, then somebody please say stop. Right. Right.
All right.
Right. You know, sometimes I forget.
Sure. All right. It is 10:04, so we probably are going to have people continue to join us over the next few minutes, but we're going to get started, at least with an introduction. Again, we would invite people as you join this webinar Zoom meeting, feel free to put your name, your job title or position, and the organization you work for in the chat box, so that as we go on, we'll also have a record of who participated, although that will be, I think, part of what we have available. And the session is going to be recorded. Ruby, have you already started the recording? It is, yep, it is started according to a little red dot in my screen. Let me begin again by welcoming everybody to this second session in our Effective Case Management in the Homeless Housing System series. We're delighted to have with us today Michelle Williams. She is a HUD technical assistance provider. She's been doing that for the last 4 years with HUD. She, on her resume, it says she's part of the disaster response technical assistance team at the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, and she has over 25 years of experience working with homeless housing systems. She was working with the Washington, D.C. Continuum of Care for many years in the earlier in the earlier in this century. And she is, in terms of technical assistance work that she is doing around the country, she's done strengthening housing focused practices, participated in racial equity demonstration projects, trainings, as well as housing first case management training, and also, as we're going to hear this morning, training on trauma-informed care. I first got acquainted with Michelle last summer. Seems long ago in some ways, but not so long ago in other ways. And but I was blessed to participate with Kent Wallace Meggs from the DCRC in a 5-week intensive workshop series that Michelle and a colleague led for several CoCs around the country. So Michelle, going to turn it over to you. Again, welcome. Great. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to share my screen, see if all this works. And can you guys see that screen?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, all right, good. Right. Great, okay, thank you. So thank you, Lloyd, for inviting me. I'm really excited to talk to you all today. And so my hope is that this session, I know you've probably all been through some level of trauma-informed care kind of training, but my hope is that this kind of sheds a new light or focuses us a little more so on resiliency, because trauma is trauma, right? It's there. We can't go back in time and change it. And so we really have to focus on what we can help people do now in terms of building their resiliency with all the things that are going on. And certainly I think we've all learned that ourselves this past year, and still 2020 and still this part of 2021, that we really have to be resilient, because there's a lot of unusual things happening in the world. And so we're all figuring out how to adjust to those things and to kind of bounce back, right? Or, strive toward getting to what our new normal will be. So as we go through, again, if you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat. I do have it up on my screen so I can see it. But you also just, yell stop if you need me to take a break or to go back over something. So just to talk really about trauma-informed care and kind of its connection to the work that we do. It really provides a framework for us to guide our service delivery and recognize that trauma is present in everyone's life. It's present in our own lives. And so we want to make sure that we honor that and respond to the things that happen as a result of that trauma. And so when we think about what constitutes trauma in our lives, and I'm going to ask you to take a second and not think about the people that you're serving, but think about yourself, right? Because we have all experienced trauma. And so as we go through the kind of definition, I really want you to think about the things in your life that have been traumatic. And I want you to pay attention to how you feel when you think about those things, okay? So individual trauma can come from an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by someone physically, or that is emotionally harmful to them or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And that's the SAMHSA definition of trauma, which is the one that we tend to hold to in homeless services. So if we think about the things that have happened to us, right, particularly if we've been through physically threatening situations, life-threatening situations, or difficult emotional kinds of incidents, then those things they stick with us, right? That trauma becomes almost ingrained in our DNA, right? And it affects how we act in lots of other situations, whether they be similar or different, right? So we're going to talk about kind of what that means. So trauma can be experienced individually. It can be experienced as part of a family or a community or a larger social group. And if you think back on just the COVID-19 pandemic, right, that's been a trauma that we as a nation and as a world have experienced. And so if you think about all the things that have happened, even the adjusting to the practice of wearing a mask, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but I can see masks in my future for a very long time, right? Because now we know more and we know what could happen and the risk that we pose from a health standpoint to each other, to the people we love. And so we're going to be much more cognizant of that in the future. Trauma can also be passed down through generations, right? So I often talk about that, particularly in the African American community, right? We often, in some ways, teach a trauma response to our children, right? And if we think about what we go through when we are trying to explain to children and to young adults about how to interact with police, right? We have a very set kind of thing. This is what you should do, right? If you're stopped by the police, you keep both hands on the steering wheel, right? You don't make any sudden moves. You know, all of those things you talk through. You put someone on a cell phone so that you have some record of what's happening to you. And so that's how we kind of pass trauma down through generations, is because the reaction to what has occurred is what we then teach, right? Trauma is exacerbated by historical and current structural and environment factors that marginalize or oppress groups of people. I'm sure in your community, as well as in my own and across the country, we're talking a lot about vaccine hesitancy, particularly amongst Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And there are a lot of things that have contributed to that, going way back in time, right, to the 1800s, but also things that have happened as recent as 2020. And so we have to understand that our world contains factors that marginalize or oppress groups of people, and that causes trauma. And if we're going to assist people and support people, we have to recognize that that exists. And then acknowledging and responding to trauma requires that we pay attention to that structural racism, but also that we develop a commitment in what we do to making sure that we're trauma informed and that we're using anti-racist approaches to service delivery. And so one of the things that we talked about in our Strengthening Housing Focused Practice workshop that Lloyd was in was really about looking at our data, right? What does our data tell us about who's benefiting from the services we offer, right? How many people are getting to housing? What's the racial or ethnic identity of those folks? And what does that data tell us about how our system is really functioning for everyone? So there's some key principles to trauma-informed care. And so I wanna go through these. These are also from the SAMHSA definition. And the first principle is safety, making sure that people who are experiencing homelessness and staff feel psychologically safe in physical settings and interpersonal interactions, right? And those two things go hand in hand. We're talking about the people that we serve, but we're also talking about our staff, right? We don't want anybody to experience any additional trauma related to the work that they're doing. And so it's really important that we focus on how do people feel safe? And that can mean a lot of different things for a lot of people. Sometimes it's feeling safe and speaking up, feeling safe and giving their opinion, feeling safe in the decisions that they're making about what happens in the future. Another principle is trustworthiness and transparency. So making sure that as we make decisions about how people access services or receive certain services, that we're doing that in a really transparent manner. And so that we're building trust. You can rely upon what I'm saying to you about how a program works, who's eligible for the program, and that there's not some kind of hidden thing that I don't know about, or that we are not making up rules as we go along. And so I do a lot of work with the domestic violence shelter in my community. And one of the things that we really focus on with staff is making sure that we're not all of a sudden changing the rules. So I'll give you just an example. We had one day some activity going on. The kids were like really wound up, right? Like, I don't know if it was Easter, and I don't know, but there was lots of candy involved and, running around. And so the staff person on duty decided that they were going to change the curfew for children. So they said all the kids have to go to bed at 8 o'clock. And I'm like, you can't do that. That's not what we told people, right? And also, we're not the parent, right? We can't tell children when to go to bed. So, it's really about thinking about, if we're constantly adjusting things, then nobody can trust in what's going to happen, right? They don't know. You might make up a new rule right now that they've never heard of. And so as we seek to build trust with the people that we're serving, as we seek to be transparent, we really have to think about, if we're going to make a change to something, there's a conversation that we have, right, as a group to say, hey, it's been a really exhausting day to everyone. What do you think we should do? Do you think it's okay for the kids to go to bed early? I don't know. What do you guys think? Because these are your children. They're not my children. So that is a really important concept. And then peer support, making sure that you are engaging people who have lived expertise to really help others with their housing stability and other goals, right? It's really, we all kind of seek to know who, who else is like us, right? And what did they do and what their success been? And we all seek that, right? I mean, I don't know how many times we have affinity with each other, whether it's based upon a common experience. Kids go to the same school, we go to the same church, we are similar, we're in the same career field. We look to see who else is kind of like us and what happened with them. And so really making sure that people have access to others who they have a connection to and can form a connection to make the decisions that they need to make in their lives. Additionally, collaboration and mutuality. So, we really need to make sure that we're putting value on the relationship that we have with people in the partnership, right? Sometimes it can be really challenging. Like, I'm a case manager and I come in, and that makes it seem like, my title makes it seem like I'm supposed to manage what's happening, right? But really I'm not, right? I'm here to provide support, right? And I'm here to establish a relationship, to develop a partnership, and to really level that power difference, right? When we walk into someone's space, whether it's inside our program or in their home, there's a power differential there. Our staff hold a lot of power as it relates to what happens to this person, whether it's decision to terminate services to them, whether it's a decision to decide that they should be taking these other steps and putting that in a plan that they may not agree with. But we need to make sure that we're leveling the power differences and that we understand what power we hold when we walk into a space. I say a lot of times in my case management training that the very presence of us in someone's life is inherently disrespectful, because no one wants anyone to come in and to be making decisions over what happens to them and to their families. And so we have to understand that as we walk in the door, and we have to make sure that we are putting in the extra effort to be respectful, and to really make sure that we're promoting that shared power and decision making, and that it is their life. It's not our lives that we're actually talking about. Thinking about empowerment, voice, and choice, right? We have to really believe in the fact that people can be resilient and they can overcome their current circumstances, and that they have the ability, both individually and as a community, to heal from whatever trauma they have had in their lives. And so we have to focus in on honoring the strengths that they have shown in times of stress and trauma before, and that we can build upon, and really focus on that self-determination, right? Helping people make the decisions that they want to make for their lives, right? And then the last principle is just cultural, historical, and gender issues. So we need to be examining, interrogating our systems, and to identify and address any inequities or biases that are caused or perpetuated by the way we deliver services. I don't know where your community is on this. A lot of communities, and I'm sure you've heard it, that have used the VI SPDAT assessment tool have found that did not help them address inequities, that it actually perpetuated inequities that were in the system. And so they've made a decision to stop using that tool, or to add things that will add questions to the assessment that will help make sure that we can not have bias in our assessment process. Bias starts with the VI SPDAT, as you all know, is a piece of paper, right? Or questions in a database, right? Bias starts in the individual who's administering that assessment. And so we have to look internally as well at the biases that we hold, and we all hold them. We all hold them. And so if we're not aware of that, then we are perpetuating that on other people, right? And I've done this work for long enough that there's people in your program, there's people in your life, there's people in your workplace that you have an issue with, right? They're challenging to you, right? And that could be because there's some bias that you hold about that person or their circumstance or their racial ethnic identity or their LGBTQ status or anything. And so acknowledging that within ourselves and working to address that and make sure that we are not continuing that. We have a responsibility as a system to ensure that all of the services we provide are culturally and gender responsive, that we leverage the healing value of traditional cultural connections, and that we adapt our policies, our program rules, our procedures to the racial, ethnic, and cultural needs of people, and recognize that there has been impact from the historical trauma that people and groups have experienced. So, are there any questions about kind of those principles or anything at this point? Giving the chat a second. Okay. I love it when you guys ask questions though, just so you know. So just as we move forward, feel free to jump in, make comments, you know, snap in the chat, anything like that, right? Say, I don't agree with you, whatever. Put it all in there so that we're, you know, interactive. So we're going to move on to the rest of the story, right? The rest of the story is really about resiliency, okay? So not only do the symptoms and the symptoms of trauma, but the experience of trauma can affect all kinds of things in our lives. It affects us individually as people, right? So it affects our clients themselves. It affects others, right? And I'm sure you all know that the people that you're working with who've experienced trauma, which is everyone, you know, sometimes that experience of that trauma impacts you. It impacts the work that you need to do with them, and that you're tasked with doing with them. It affects their whole life, right? Once you've had exposure to a traumatic event, it's going to change the way you look at the world. And so, you know, whether it's something that, you know, happened to you individually or happened in a group. I can remember I was at an event, this is many years ago in DC, and there's a community like event. And that day, somebody drove into the crowd during that event. And it happened almost right after I left the event. But that has still, I was like, just the seeing the aftermath, right? And coming back to that to help with what happened has affected me. And so every time I'm in a crowd, right, at an event, I'm always looking around, right? I'm taking a look around to make sure, like, are there barriers, right? And we make sure that a car's not gonna harm people. I'm paying attention. And so everything that we do following a traumatic event can be different than it was before. And if we truly want to help people, we have to understand how they're experiencing the trauma that they've been exposed to. We can't assume that we know what happened. We may have worked with, you know, 25 people who've experienced domestic violence in their lives, and every single one of those reacted differently to that trauma. And so we can't assume that we understand. There's some things that we do know. One is that trauma affects people, but how it shows up may look different for every one of those 25 people. So I want to talk to you about a concept that's the children's mandate, and it comes out of youth work, really focused on youth who are in foster care or really just out of the youth development field by a place in Michigan called Star Commonwealth. And they're a leader in thought and practice around serving youth who've experienced trauma. So this is children's mandate, but we're really talking about people's mandate because we were all children at one time. And a lot of times what we have experienced and what other people have experienced in terms of trauma goes all the way back to childhood. And so I want us to think about it first for ourselves from that level, but also for the people that we're working with. So if you don't think what I think, if you don't feel what I feel, if you don't experience what I have experienced and see what I see when I look at myself and when I look at others and the world around me, you don't know. How can you possibly know what's best for me? So if you think about that from the clients that you're working with, right? You have not thought what they thought. You are not feeling what they feel. You are not experiencing what they are experiencing. And you don't see what they see when they look in the mirror, or when they look at all of us, or when they look at the world around them. And so you have to know that. So you can't come in saying, well, this is the thing you should do, right? Because we don't know. We can only make suggestions. We can only say there might be a couple options. Let's talk about them. Let's see how you feel about those. Let's talk about the things that could happen. And you can make a decision about what's best for you. So trauma disfigures and distorts the way an individual sees themselves, others, and their life experiences. And those symptoms and behavior are not as important as understanding how that person's experience of trauma has shaped their private logic. And private logic is that thing that we say to ourselves, right? When something's happening and we are faced with a situation, it's our private logic that tells us how we want to deal with that. So it's not about what's happening, it's about what the person is telling themselves when something is occurring. So in private logic, sometimes people respond to things with by doing whatever they have to do to let you know they're terrified, right? You think about this happening in children who are running and screaming because they don't have the words, right, yet to explain what they're afraid of. But in adults, we see this same thing, right? We see what are adult behaviors that show that we're scared. Anger. Yep. We shut down. We run away, right? Isolation. We avoid, right? Withdrawal. We don't answer the door, right? You come knocking, we don't answer that door, right? We turn off the lights and we hide, right? We don't take steps, right? We might have identified that something is important and needs to happen, but if we're afraid, we don't do it, right? We procrastinate. And I'll give you an example just from my own life. From my own life of something that, and you guys may identify this, right? Identify with this. So I'm sure if you have any level of student loan debt, right, that has been troublesome at some point, right? And you've been kind of afraid. So at a point in my life, I was like, I don't know what to do about this, right? And I was afraid. So my response was, I'm not gonna talk to them. Like they call, I'm not answering the phone, right? I don't know what to do. I don't have that much money, so I can't make any. I'm just gonna avoid it and pretend like it's not happening, right? And so it really took, and I'll just tell you exactly what happened. A friend of mine who I was like, I don't know how to talk to these people. I don't know what to say. She said, let me help you, right? And we sat on either side of a speakerphone, right? And she called in as me and I wrote notes. So I didn't have to have the conversation, right? I was informed. I'm sitting there, I'm writing notes. I'm telling her like what to say, how to answer the questions. But she really had the initial conversation. She did the negotiation for me, or with me. And it took away that fear, right? That I was like, oh my gosh, right? Like we actually got somewhere, right? We came to an agreement. They understood where I was. We were able to renegotiate the whole thing, right? It was great. But it was a step I couldn't take myself because I was afraid, right? So think about the things that you have faced. And when you are terrified of something, right, you engage in behaviors, right? And sometimes it takes someone, a good friend, right, a good support to step in and to help you with that. So that's one example of private logic. Another example of private logic that people tell themselves is I'll do whatever I need to do in order to control you and your responses. I don't trust you and I need to survive. So when we think about the people we're working with who from day to day don't know that they're not going to be homeless again or that their homelessness is going to end, right? So whether we have supported them and they're in shelter programs, they don't know if we're going to take that away, in the blink of an eye. They don't know. So they respond to you based on the fact that they don't trust you, and they always have to be prepared for that other shoe to drop, right? Or for things to change very quickly. And so you see this show up. How do you see this show up when people don't trust you or they have kind of that survival instinct kicking in. You guys clients all trust you, you're good. Okay. Well, in my experience, right? Sometimes they yell at me, right? Sometimes they have, you know, what we would refer to as an attitude, right? Or, yeah, I won't talk to you. I'm only going to tell you what I want to tell you, right? Or I'm not listening, right? You're talking, but I'm like somewhere else, I'm looking all around. They say what they need to say to make you happy in that moment, and then they don't do it, right? Or they say everything's okay. There's no problem, right? How many people don't want to bring up a problem, right? Because they're afraid that that problem will lead to them, to things changing for them, and they're afraid to do that. So they'll tell you everything's great when in fact it's not, right? Maybe they have an illness, maybe they're not able to pay their rent, maybe there's stuff going on with their kids, and they don't share that with you because they're afraid that it will change what's happening. So thank you for your stuff in the chat about that. I really appreciate it. So also, in terms of our private logic, sometimes we will fight any experience, any activity, and any person that tries to control us because we are vulnerable to abuse and abandonment. It's happened before and it will happen again. Yeah. So we see this all the time, right? I don't trust, right? So I'm just gonna fight against everything, right? If you try to tell me something that needs to change or I'm not following a program rule, I'm gonna fight you. I'm immediately gonna like just go off, right? Because that's how I've learned to prepare myself for the potential of abuse and abandonment, is that I'm gonna go first, right? I'm gonna just go, totally off first, because that way you can't hurt me, right? So we really have to pay attention to when that's happening. That's happening because people have experienced abuse and abandonment before, and they think it will happen again. And so they have that fight or flight response, right? I'm going to fight, I'm going to run away, or I'm going to freeze, which is the other thing that we see with that, right? Which is the situation I'm not going to do anything, right? Right? We're just not going to do anything about it, and it'll go away on its own. And so we know that doesn't happen. So as we're working with people and we're seeing the behaviors that we see sometimes, recognize that it's coming from that private logic, right? That people have as a result of trauma. It's changed, right? If a person has never experienced, and I don't know who this is, and if we find them, we should, like, I don't know, put them in a bubble, because that's obviously where they lived if they never experienced any trauma. But if we've never experienced trauma in a certain area, we're not afraid of it, right? We step right into it, right? We're like, great, this is good. I'd like to go with this. I'd like to find out more. But most people are not that person. And so if something's happened, you will see this behavior, and this is because of what they're telling themselves. So lastly, another private logic thought is that I will not do what you want me to do, because if I do and I don't do well at it, you will ridicule me, berate me, shame me, abuse me, or abandon me. Now that's not case manager behavior, right? We're all like, we don't do that, but we do, right? Somebody tries something and they fail at it, and we immediately dive right into the failure. Well, you should have done this. You should have done that, right? That is how we are shaming people, right? Instead of saying, yeah, okay, well, what do we need to do next? Because even though that didn't go as we planned, right? There may be something else we can do, and let's see what we can move forward to the next step, right? And support people through the process of failure. And if we think about our own lives, right, it is failure that causes us to learn the most, right? And we hope that our failure doesn't result in, such significant consequences as becoming homeless or experiencing tragedy. But we all experience failure, and it's through that we learn to take the next step. It's through saying, okay, yep, that didn't quite work the way I thought. So let me see what the next step I can take is to try to resolve this situation. So keep that in mind as you're going through with people and thinking about how you respond, right? And the things you tell yourself, right? About trying to do something and it not going well, and how you feel that people are going to look at you. And if you look at your relationship with the parental figures in your life, right? This is something we've all experienced, right? We don't do well and we don't want to tell, right? Because we're afraid that people will either abandon us or shame us or somehow make us feel worse about what's happening. And so as case managers, as people working in homeless service programs, we have to make sure that we're not making people feel worse, right? That we're saying, it's okay, we can take the next step together. So when we think about trauma-informed and resilience-focused spaces, those are spaces that foster the possibility of well-being, right? By restoring and nurturing resilience, despite whatever may be happening, right? And if you think about your own life, you have that person who things seem to be going terribly wrong, but you can go to them and they're gonna say, it's okay. We can make sure this is okay. It will get better, right? That we need to be that person for the people that we're serving. They need to know when they're talking to us that we're here to make sure that they're resilient and that they can handle and support through any adversity that they may face, right? Now, not every adversity that they face are we able to fix, right? And a lot of times we focus on fixing, and we can't fix everything. We can't fix a whole lot of things in our world, but we can support people through the process of identifying what is the path that they should take or that they want to take as a result, and trying to get to the places they want to be in their lives. So just thinking about how, when you're talking to someone, are you making it a safe place for them? Do they know that you are focused on their achievement, and that you believe that they can achieve goals? And I'm sure there are program administrators and directors on here, and people who, we work with staff who hold a lot of fear. We hold a lot of fear sometimes for our clients. And so when we look at a situation, we see all the negative things that could happen, right? And, sure, negative things can happen, but we really need to focus on the positive things that could happen, right? So yes, moving someone out into rapid rehousing, right? And feeling like they don't have enough money, because when we look at it on paper, it doesn't make sense. We don't see how they're going to be able to pay that rent on their own, right? That's a really negative viewpoint, instead of believing that we are transparent with people, that we have gone over the housing situation. We've explained what the rental costs are. We've identified what are the parameters of the program that we have, and that we are supporting them and taking the steps to get there where they want to be. And that's a belief that they can, in fact, pay that rent on their own eventually, right? So we worry. We tend to focus on that negative stuff. But in reality, we need to show belief that people can't. If this is what you want to achieve, I know you can do it, right? I can give you some suggestions, right, about things that you could pursue. And we do that, right? But sometimes our fear is overriding that, right? So even when we're talking to someone and we're saying, you can probably get more hours at your job, or you could look for another job, a second job, or we're sometimes still coming at that from a fear place, right? And we're like, what if you don't? What if you don't get another job? What if you don't, right? And that's not helpful, right? It's not helpful to anyone, right? Because we all want to believe, if this is what I want to do, I want to believe I can do it, and I want everybody around me to believe it as well. So when we think about kind of what's happening with folks, we need to recognize that the behavior that we see is the beginning. It's not the end, right? So even if you're working with someone and they're exhibiting some of those behaviors we talked about, the fight, the flight, the freeze, right? It's the beginning. It's not the end. It doesn't mean that that's going to be their only response, and that we can't help them through this process. Behavior is a clue, right? It's going to communicate to us that there's trauma there, and this is how they're communicating, their way of communicating that trauma in their private logic, in how they're responding to you. That's just a clue that there are other things happening, and this is the way they're communicating how they're experiencing what's happening. When people are kind of exhibiting these behaviors, it's highly unlikely that they're going to want to talk, reason, or use logic, right? And you know this, right? If someone comes in, gets upset, starts yelling, we're not going to be able to talk it out today, right? We need to just take a break, right? And we need to just say, okay, hey, I know this is really upsetting, and I want to make sure that you know I'm here to support you, but today's not the day we should talk about it. And move on, right? And leave if that's what you need to do. But understand that you're never going to be able to get someone who's exhibiting that behavior to talk or reason or use logic in that moment, right? Because they are reacting out of the trauma that they have experienced. And so you have to acknowledge that and recognize that and use it to symbolize what the person's experienced or they're experiencing, and use that to change your response to them, right? Because we're not here to like fight with people. We're not here to fix all the things that went wrong. We're here to talk about how do we move forward from here? What are your goals? How do we help you move there? And I'm identifying by your behavior that there's something else going on. And so how do I need to change my response in relationship to that? So the bad news is that trauma is just a fact, right? It's a fact of life. We all have experienced trauma. We all will continue to experience trauma, right? And it will affect how we move forward. But the good news is that resilience is also a fact, right? And if you think about your own life, right? Because I always say that, you've heard me say it a lot. I'm like, we are just like the people we are serving. We are just like them. In some ways, we've experienced some of the same things, right? In some ways, we've experienced different traumas. But what we know is that we have been resilient. And so that means that other people can be resilient as well. So I want to talk to you just about kind of this model from Star Commonwealth that is kind of a circle of courage, right? And it really is looking at, you know, as I said, they work with children. So it's kind of a structure for working with children or youth who are at risk, but it's about people. And so when we think about the structure that we need to use in working with people, this can be a helpful framework for us to take a look at that. And we really want to make sure that we are not labeling people as lost causes, that we are not reclaiming the at-risk environment that they come from. So we are not recreating that risk ourselves within our programs, and that we can actually provide people with hope for the future. And it's based on the universal principle that we all need a sense of belonging, mastery, independence, and generosity to be emotionally healthy. So this is a overview or a framework that comes out of Native American traditions. So it's a unique model that encourages the cultural wisdom of tribal people, the practice wisdom of professional people who have worked with troubled youth, and the findings of modern research through the efforts of Martin Brokenleg and Larry Brentro. So it kind of combines all of that in helping us look at what's happening and look at the folks we're working with from this framework. So the first focus that they have is on belonging, right? We really want to focus on making sure that people can have a connection, right? That they're related somehow to everyone that we know. And if we think about our own lives, right? And I do this in thinking about the people that I work with. We're all the same. We all have a connection, right? We have a connection, whether we know it or not. We have a connection because we're in the same space. We have a connection because we have a common experience. If you think about what's happened with the COVID-19 pandemic, right? That really showed us how much our well-being depends on others' well-being. So we need to make sure that we're focusing on the connections that we have and the social bonds that will create the relationships of respect that we need to do the work. So how we connect with people by applying this model and connecting with ourselves is really being curious about how the person is experiencing the world, asking them, so this is happening, how does that feel to you? Getting to know them, right? You know, sometimes we walk in as case managers and, you know, we have a list of stuff. We got to get this assessment done. I got to fill out the service plan. I got to do all these things. And we don't really take the time to get to know people. We take the time to get to know our forms and how to fill them out. And so we want to make sure that we set aside stuff and that we get to know people. We understand how they're thinking about the day and approaching them in the place that you would approach anyone else. Hey, how's it going? What's going on with this weather, right? Like, did you see what's happening in Texas, right? Like, all of those things are things that we share as part of the same world. And we need to make sure we're having honest, intentional conversations with people to form those connections. And in that, we're going to find out what they need most to feel supported. So if I'm working with someone brand new, that I want to talk to them. I want to ask them, what are the things that I can do to make sure that you feel supported as we move forward. We also want to focus on mastery. So every person wants to grow personally, right? Not necessarily to be superior, but they want to grow as people, as individuals, right? Like that's just our innate drive to be competent and to be able to solve our own problems, right? So as we talked about, when I'm coming in as a case manager, that's an indication that for some reason I can't solve my own problem. So I'm going to be upset about that, right? I'm going to look at you in a different way because I know that you are here to tell me how to solve my problem, right? But you don't know. And I want to be able to solve my own problem. So I don't want you coming in here to tell me that. But when people can have success in overcoming challenges, then their desire to achieve is strengthened. So I always say to the staff that I work with is, sometimes people have goals and it's really, really small, right? And it's not the thing that we would pick for them to start on, but it's the thing that they pick. And so if we can help someone achieve the thing that they picked and we can celebrate and support them, we create a better foundation for them to achieve the next goal, right? We create a space in which they can feel good setting a goal and working to achieve that goal. And so we have to lead by example in that, and we have to be responsible for what we do in that space. So when we're working with people, I want you to really think about focusing on their potential, right? And I'm talking about the people who you find to be probably the most irritating, right? Because the person that is irritating you the most, right, you're not going to be able to see their potential unless you work hard at it. So really focus in on saying, what's this person's potential, right? How can I help them grow? Ask them these questions. Tell me the things you want to do in your life. How can I support you in doing that? We can model for people emotional awareness, right? Just like I told you the story about how I was afraid of something and somebody had to help me. We can share our own stories with people and say, hey, it takes a lot, right? And how can I support you in that? And make sure that we practice and we keep our emotions regulated, right? When we're working with people. And so if you find yourself that you're not able to really control how you're feeling in the moment, it's best for you to step away, right? Because you know what happens when one person is not in control and the other person is not in control, then we have a battle that begins to occur. And sometimes our case management relationships never recover from that battle. And so make sure that you know where you are in the space and when you walk in, and make sure that you're able to help someone else, identify and regulate their emotions and provide opportunities for them to experience their strength. Sometimes we have to highlight this for people. I've had people come in and they're like, oh, I have these 5 kids and, I haven't been able to finish high school and, we don't have a place to live. Okay. So how are your kids doing? Right? Oh, my kids are doing good. They're going to school and I've been able to keep them, right, keep up with their homework. Well, that's great, right? Because that shows that you can manage a lot. 5 kids is a lot, right? So if you can help them, in staying focused on their schoolwork and doing well in school, that is great, right? And so let's see how we can use that strength to help you in achieving the things that you want. We also have a focus on independence, right? So native teaching was designed to build respect and to teach inner discipline. And so from childhood, children are encouraged to make decisions, to solve problems, and to show personal responsibility, right? And so it's really important that we continue to model that for people. So adults model that behavior, they nurture children, they teach values, and they give feedback. But children are given abundant opportunities to make choices without coercion, right? And so we need to make sure that as we're working with people, that we're not coercing them into something, right? We need to make sure that we're showing people how to look at the pros and cons of the decisions that they need to make, how they can get feedback from us, get feedback from others in their lives as they make those decisions, how they can apply the things that the values that they have and that are important, and that they can rely on us and trust us and know that we're not coming in to control or to take away independence from them, but we're here to support and to say, let's talk about the choices that are available to you. So when we are working with them, we're providing choice and options and asking them where they need support. What do they need the most from us to be able to move forward? And then the last part of our circle is generosity. So in the Native tradition, you should be able to give away your most cherished possession without your heart beating faster, right? And think about that. Sometimes when we have something and we're like, I really love this, right? Like I don't want to share it with anybody, right? I want to hold on to it. But sometimes being generous to others, right, gives us a much better feeling, and we can feel good in ourselves, and you know, don't cause additional stress by knowing that we're helping someone else. So we're creating proof of worthiness that that person has made a positive contribution to us, right, and that we can make a positive contribution to them. And so really thinking about how we point out self-worth in a person, how we provide opportunity for them to experience their value when they help others. One of the things that I have like been able to do, probably not as often as I would like, is that like if somebody likes something that I have, I'm like, I'll get you one, right? And I just get it for them because you know what? They liked it. Or if I have two, or if I have this one and you can get it and I can get another one, that's fine. Right. And so having the opportunity, if you think about that in your own life, right, that's why we love giving gifts to people, right? Because we want to demonstrate their worth to us, right? And we want to encourage them to know that they are providing some valuable contributions to our lives. And so thinking about being generous, right, when we're helping people. I'll give you just this is an example that I feel like it kind of fits, and so I'll just tell you the story and you can decide. So in the District of Columbia, we have a really strict homeless services legislation, right? And it lays out very specific roles and responsibilities for providers, but also attributes a very long list, I think 18 different rights to people experiencing homelessness. And so it sets up a process that's really an administrative hearing process. So if we're seeking to terminate someone from a program, we have to go through this legal process to do it. And it feels informal, but it's actually not, right? Like you don't have to be a lawyer to do it, but you have to go in front of an administrative law judge and you have to, you know, plead your case, right? And you have to make the case for why you are allowed to terminate this person from services. And so, you know, and the process is started by the client. Like if you take an action with a client and they don't agree with it, they can file this request for a hearing process and get things moving. And so a lot of times providers go into it, and I always say it's really hard because we have to take off our social work hats, right, and try to put on, you know, kind of a lawyer hat and say, does this make sense? And so I always say, as providers would call me and say, we want to terminate and we want to go through the process, but they would say, but, you know, we don't know what's going to happen. And I'm like, well, you know, or we're concerned about where they're going to go. And I'm like, well, if you're concerned about where they're going to go, you shouldn't terminate them, right? Because you can't do both in this process. And so a lot of times we would go through and we would plead our case and we would win, right? And at the end of that, I would offer the person a space in another shelter. And sometimes people were like, why did you do that? Why did you won the case? Why would you give them space in another shelter? And I'm like, I don't have to do damage to them in this process, right? Just because we were right doesn't mean that we can't be generous with someone or that we can't exhibit some level of grace, right? Or extend mercy to someone to say, I'm not going to try to put you in a bad situation. We had this disagreement and, you know, I turned out to be right about it, but it doesn't mean that I don't acknowledge that you still need help and it's still my responsibility to help you. So I always would say to providers, right, like if you're so concerned about where the kids are going to be, then don't terminate the person from your program, right? Work with them to say, hey, this thing happened and we need to really figure out how it's not going to happen again, right? And that includes acknowledging the trauma, because when you think about the things that people are terminated from programs for, a lot of it has to do with behavior and behavior that they are exhibiting in response to the trauma and the things that they are telling themselves about themselves when they look in the mirror and about us and about what the world is going to provide. So really think about ways that in your work, you can be generous with people, right? You can say, how do I show you that you have value and that you have value to us, you have value to yourself, you have value to your family. And how do I support you in making sure that you can kind of live out that in the things that you do and the decisions that you make. So when we encounter challenges with our clients, how do we typically respond? Okay, yeah, it only takes a second. We get frustrated, right? We get really frustrated. We don't know what to do, right? It's a bad day at work that day, right? We complain to our coworkers, right? We try to put ourselves in a position to fix it, right? We are approaching it like it's a challenge. I'm gonna fix it, right? I'm gonna make it better, and a lot of times we can't do that. We worry internally, right? And we try to show that we don't worry externally, but we do. You wouldn't be in this work if you didn't have caring for people and want to see that good things happen for people who have experienced a whole lot of bad things. And so we worry internally. We take that on, right? And that affects our ability to care for ourselves. But we also worry externally, and yeah, you know, that's okay too. I think it's okay for us to show that and to express it. You know, not from the position of like, oh my God, this awful thing is happening to us, but really responding to it from a position of, you know, is there an opportunity for us to, is there a way for us to see this as an opportunity, right? So something is going on in someone's life. What's the opportunity in that to help them, to create an environment that's supportive? Right. Lloyd said we want to solve people's problems and challenges for them. And we don't have the ability to do that all the time, right? If a person can't afford their rent, I don't have the ability to make them have more money. I can make suggestions about ways that they could get more money. I could make suggestions about looking for housing that's a little bit more affordable. I can do all of that, but I can't solve that specific challenge. But I have the opportunity to have someone look at things a little bit differently and to consider other perspectives. And so when we think about kind of how we're approaching what's happening with a person, we can kind of relate it back to this quote. When a flower's not blooming, we change the pot, we change the soil, we change the location, but we don't change the flower, right? So if we think about our clients, right, something's happening. And so we look at what in the environment, how can we adjust the environment to make it more supportive and more fruitful for this flower and for this person? So really thinking about that it's not, you know, the problem is not inherent in the person. It may be inherent in the environment in which the person is in. And if we can help them change the environment, if we can help them change their thinking by being positive and supportive with them, then maybe we change what the potential can be for them to achieve their goals. So when we think about how to make it trauma informed and resilience focused, we want to focus on positive reinforcement through encouraging feedback and noticing, right? If you know, talk to your clients, get to know them, right? If you notice that, hey, I noticed that, you know, you got the kids report card and they are doing great in school. I know you're very proud of that, right? Really think about noticing the things that are going well, because as we know from our own lives, right? If stuff's going wrong, we tend to see that before anything else, right? And so we have to pay attention sometimes to say, hey, nope, this is going well, this is going well, and we have to you know have a purpose, a focused look and identification of the things that are going well that help us get through the things that may not be going so well. Really making sure that we're establishing that connection with people, that we're seeking to build a relationship and not just a rapport. And so I want to make sure we understand that a bit, because, you know, I know we have a lot of conversation in our field about boundaries, right? And, you know, I think we have that conversation. I always tell my staff, I don't want you to form a friendship right? I want you to just have a relationship. I have a relationship with people I work with. We're not friends, right? But we have a relationship. I have a relationship with the people when I go to my local grocery store, right? And I see them. I have a relationship with those folks, but we're not friends, right? And so we can have a relationship with someone, right? In which we understand how mutually we have similar experiences and that we have a way of supporting each other and that not just rapport. So it's not just about like, this person is always able to establish a good rapport because their clients always talk to them. Well, that's part of it, but people talk to you because they feel a connection to you. And so if they can feel a connection to you, it's easier for them to talk about the things that are going well and the things that are not going so well, right? And our job is to manage that relationship so that it stays within the boundaries that it should be, which focuses on you as a support person, a professional support person in their lives. We also need to search for and build upon their individual strengths and interests and really think about intrinsic motivation. So research shows that people will continue to work toward their personal goals when their intrinsic motivation is high, right? Not when the external motivation is high, right? Like 100 people could want me to do something, but if I don't want to do it, I'm not going to do it. So when we think about how we're going to assist people, we want to make sure that we're focusing on the process of identifying goals, the process of taking the steps to work toward achieving those goals, the strategies that we have to kind of reshape or re-identify new steps when things don't quite work, when we have the ability to really focus on that effort that's involved and not the end result. We can help people build intrinsic motivation toward their personal goals. And I say their personal goals because I'm not talking about your program goals. Your program can have a million goals, right? Your program has a goal that everybody leaves here with an income that allows them to afford housing independently on their own for the rest of their lives. That may not happen, right? And we know that, right? We know that people maybe move forward and then something happens and they may take a couple steps back and they may come back through our programs, right? That happens. But if we want to help people create that internal motivation about the things that they want in their lives. So a lot of times people kind of cycle because we didn't really identify what their goals were. And so as a result of not dealing with the stuff that they think is important, it's that kind of set them up to not be able to maintain in the way that we would love to see them maintain. And so really thinking about how you ask the divergent questions, right, about what people want, asking for feedback and showing appreciation, right, when they are able to achieve the things that they've identified, really showing support for that and helping them know that, great, like what's the next thing you want to do. So thinking about the supports and kind of a framework for how we can provide support to people, we want to remember that our approach needs to be trauma informed and resilience focused, right? So a person who is kind of off task, right? Or, not necessarily following the path that we would like them to be following at this point, so we could make sure our reports are done and that we have achieved goals and all of that. Really ask yourself kind of these 4 key questions before you try to help the person. So the first is, am I currently able to regulate my own emotions and behavior? So if I'm at work and we've just had a staff meeting and we need to get more exits out of this program, right? And now I'm stressed because now I think that, like, if I don't get my exit rate up, right, for the program, then, I could lose my job. Then I'm not in a place to now go talk to somebody about what their goals are, right? Because I may not be able to really regulate my own emotions or behavior in that moment. And I know this has happened to all of us because no person has approached every situation perfectly. We have all gone into situations and totally messed it up. Right? Doesn't mean we can't recover, but we've done it. And a lot of times that's because we are not in control of what's happening with our emotions and behaviors at the time. When we are looking at our clients and we're evaluating and we start to understand more about them through our relationship, we can help identify which one or more of these this person's universal needs are lacking right now, right? Is it because they don't feel like they belong? Is it because they feel like they don't have control over a situation, that they're not able to make their own decisions, or they don't feel like they have anything to give to other people or a way to be generous? And so if we think about where some of that may be coming from or where they're kind of lacking, then we can adjust our approach to figure out if there's a way we can support that person to regulate their behaviors and emotions in that moment. And so as we're discussing something that is troubling and we start to see the behaviors that we see, we need to say, okay, what's happening here? Is it an issue of them just, this person wants to be in control and they don't want me over here telling them anything, right? That's okay, right? Because it's okay to not want people in your life to tell you what to do. But how can we support that person in saying, okay, let's take a step back. What can I do to support you in moving forward? Tell me what you want me, how I can help you, how I can be supportive. And then we need to figure out, can this be a learning opportunity, right? So we've had a challenge. We've engaged in some discussion about that. Some of that discussion may be a little bit more heated. Is there a way for us to, if we've established a relationship, then there's a way for us to come back to that, to recover from that, to say, hey, that was really hard, right? Our last conversation was really hard, and I know it was really hard. It was hard for you, it was hard for me. How can we decide, how can we move forward together, right? What can I do to support you so that I'm not causing you more stress in your life, right? And so really thinking about how we can do that, but asking ourselves these questions, right? As we step into a situation, let's make sure we're regulating our emotions. We're looking to see where a person has a need right now. What kind of quadrant, and how can we best support them and help them learn from this moment. Lastly, I just have some reflection questions for you all that I'm hoping you can, and I'm happy to answer any other questions, but I'm hoping that we can kind of through the chat talk through these reflections. And I'd really like to know, what made you decide to work in homelessness?
If folks would like to speak, please press the raise hand button and I'll allow you to unmute.
All right. Mary?
So my name is Mary, and I've worked with a population of people for a number of years that dealt with addiction. And I myself is coming up on 20 years in addiction, addiction recovery, from addiction rather. But I've worked for the last 13 years with people who, once they decide that I'm ready to do something different, like this time is really different from the last 25 or 30 or 50 times, like this time for real, I want to get my life together. And what I have concluded is that if a person is homeless, if they do not know where I'm going to stay tonight, it is impossible. It is close to impossible for that person to recover. And the reason for that I've seen is oftentimes a person that burnt all the bridges, and we have worked with people at our agency in the past who have been banned from the shelter. And if you can't go to the shelter, you are in, well, you know the rest. So I choose to work with people not only with homelessness, but with addiction, to be able to help them understand, if you have somewhere to call home, whatever that look like, you have a valuable asset. Yep. And when we place people in housing, one of the things I try to implement and get them to understand, if you are able to be placed in housing, whatever that look like, don't take that for granted, because it does not come by every day. But if a person can learn how to get, control over their lives, whether it's mental health, whether it's addiction or domestic violence, whatever those challenges may be, they have to understand that when someone connect you with housing, look, hold on to that. hold on
Right,
to, because
exactly.
it's hard
Right,
to be productive if you don't have nowhere to stay.
right,
It's hard.
exactly. Yeah, Lauren's put in the chat, people can't do as much personal growth until their basic needs are met, right? If I don't know where I'm gonna stay tonight, then it's hard for me to talk about anything else, right? Like I can't think about anything else that needs to happen because my basic needs are not being met. And that's the whole philosophy behind the housing first approach, right? Which is that if we can help people achieve housing, then they have a platform to begin tackling other challenges that they may have in their life. And and a platform for continuing, because challenges don't go away, right? We overcome one thing and there's another, right? And so that's okay, but housing gives people a stable place and an ability to feel comfortable, right, and supported, right, because they have just that basic need uh, being met. Of I have a place to sleep inside, right, and it's mine. Philip is the next person whose hand is raised. Philip, you want to go ahead? Yep.
Yes. Oh, I thought we were talking about how do we get into the
Yeah,
homeless.
go ahead. That's
Oh,
fine.
yeah.
Yeah, Mary.
Okay.
Mary said. I think we heard how Mary got into it, but yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I got into it as a project for one of my classes in my senior year in college. We had to we were given nonprofits and stuff like that to go out to, and one of mine happened to be a homeless shelter in Columbia, South Carolina. It was a men's homeless shelter. And that was my first experience of dealing with people who have become homeless, because I'm from a small town. So there's like no such thing as homeless, because, everybody know everybody, and, family is everything. So we always live with each other. So after experiencing that and seeing that people who were homeless were not always, on drugs or did bad things, it's just life happens, because some of these people still had jobs and,
Yep.
and still had vehicles and things. So yeah, so after that, I just stayed with it, and I'm now here. So yeah, that's how I got into it. It was like a big realization, like homelessness is different for everybody. It's not all,
Yeah.
thinking that people are lazy and don't work and things like that, because a lot of them do. So
Yeah. Exactly. Right. Yeah. And I think even this year has shown us how I mean, things can change drastically for people, right? Like if you think about all the businesses that are closed and are still closed, right? As a result of the pandemic, those people weren't like, they didn't do anything, right? Like so things happen to people. And, I always say when you have folks who are, and Mary, I'm sure you know this, right? Like we have folks who are dealing with like a variety of things. You don't know what came first, right? I don't know if someone started using drugs after they became homeless. I don't know if their mental health challenge developed after they became homeless or whether it developed before. And so, but only in talking to people will we know that. We worked with a gentleman in DC who was hearing impaired, and he was on the street and he drank, right? And so we were able to connect him with housing and get him moved into permanent housing. And we were going through, kind of setting up his apartment so that it had the necessary accommodations for, flashing light, fire alarm versus the, beeping noise. And one of the things that we learned in kind of helping him get into housing and kind of get settled was that his drinking reduced, right? And so, we were like, "Hey, what's going on? Like, why were you?" And he said that he drank when he was on the street because it was the only way he could go to sleep. Because otherwise, he was always in alert because he didn't know, he couldn't hear if someone was approaching or anything like that. So his drinking, because he didn't have that safety when he was on the street, the drinking helped him to, be able to fall asleep and, to try to get some level of rest. And so when he moved into housing, he didn't have that same concern. So he didn't drink as often. So we just don't ever know kind of what's happening. But what we do know is that there's a benefit, period, from helping people get into housing, whether or not they ever change any other behaviors. We had a program that was kind of our first effort at rapid rehousing in DC. It was supposed to be a 2-year program. We closed a large family shelter. We moved 170 families into the community, and a 2-year program lasted 7 years. And you know, people would always say, oh my gosh, like they didn't leave in 2 years or whatever, they weren't independent. But when we did a kind of a survey of the residents, what we found is that their children were on the honor roll, right? They felt better. That just the fact that the children had a stable place to be for that 7-year period changed their lives, right? And so even if the parent never stopped using drugs, even if the parent never found significant employment, even if the parent, you know, stayed in whatever relationships that they were in, there was still a benefit from housing to that family. And so we have to really look beyond what we see on the surface and look at what's possible if we can just help people, you know, connect to housing, you know, first, and then looking at what steps they want to take after that and what that means for them and their children. So the next question I have for reflection, if we have time, I just want to mention Anne's comment, which is that our country is too wealthy for homelessness and poverty to exist. And she believes that housing is a human right and every person is an important member of our community and everyone ought to have enough, right? I wholeheartedly agree with that. I don't have the ability to make it happen, but if I ever do have an ability, right, I want to push that because it is really important that we accept that how connected we are from our basic health, as we've learned through the COVID-19 pandemic, is connected to the health of every other person in our community. And so if we don't help people who are experiencing homelessness to get into housing, right, it affects us in the long term, right? Because we are connected. And then, Anne, you asked the question, is the 7-year project one that will be modeled? You know, not formally, but it did teach us a lot about the supports that needed to be in kind of the next type of program. And so in DC, housing is extremely unaffordable, and we say that these programs will be a time limit, but they're not. And so, but it did help us figure out how to support people and how to celebrate the things that they thought were important, because it was a kind of a shock to me that when we just asked people, you know, what do you think has this experience benefited you, and the ways that they described and the level of pride that they had in what had happened with their families just showed us so much about the value of supporting people and supporting them through challenges and supporting them, you know, to get into housing, you know, as our very first step. So I don't know if anyone wants to think about the reflection. What does it mean? I think we've seen that. So I'm going to go to the next one, which is, do you practice self-care on a daily basis? Nope. Yep. Yep. No, I don't. I'll be honest and say no. Philip says I try. Right. Let me tell you, this is, and I would tell you my answer is no as well. Right. I don't practice self-care on a daily basis. Right. And that is not uncommon. And we all need to ask Malcolm how he's doing that, because yeah, he puts that as a priority. And Amani, you know, how's that happening? It can be because we are in a helping profession, right? Which says to me that we are people who want to be helpful. We want to be supportive of people. We don't do this because of the paycheck. That's just the flat out reality of the situation. But it is that situation. Yeah. It is that situation in which we need to put on our own mask first, right? Our own oxygen mask. If the plane is going down, we have to put our own mask on first before we can assist anybody else. And so I really just want to encourage you to think about your self-care, whatever that may mean to you, and try to make sure that you have a focus on it and you're practicing as often as you possibly can, right? And I know that, you know, just day-to-day life is a challenge sometimes, but if it's 15 minutes, right, to go running in the rain, right, then do that, because you have to take care of yourself first. One, because we want you to be healthy for you. We want you to be healthy for your family, right? And we want you to be healthy for the people that you're serving. And so really focus on that. Lloyd put a recommendation, and then Beverly says, yes, my higher power first, me second, and everyone else comes after. I have to be emotionally healthy, spiritually healthy, and physically healthy in order for me to be any good to anyone else, right? What do you tell people about of lived experience doing this work about self-care? You tell them the same things that I want you to say to yourself. It's really important to take care of you, right? And while you are using your experience to support others, it's important that you don't let yourself be drained completely from that. And so how can we identify what helps you rejuvenate, right? Is it just taking a few minutes to read a book, right? Or to go listen to music, or just whatever stands out for that person. And then when we think about how we help people who are assisting us in this work, people who have lived experience, who are supporting people and working right alongside of us, what can we do to support them? If I know that my colleague likes to go listen to, jazz music in the park in the summer when we used to be able to do that, maybe I invite them to go to a concert. Maybe I say, hey, did you know this was happening, right? And let's go together, because it's a way of supporting people and being generous, right? And helping them then be generous to others. So I think we all know we have to focus on it. People who have figured it out, I have to focus because I'm no good for anyone else if I don't do it. And we all have that thing for ourselves that we need to figure out how to do more often. So yeah, you guys thought about what you do. People have shared what they do. But even if you're not doing it, what's the thing you would like to do? Right? And how can you start doing that on a regular basis? So really focusing on that for yourself so that you can make sure that you are helping yourself first, and then you can help others. And also recognizing that you are not in this alone. Supporting healthy development does not fall all on your shoulders. It's a community. It's the community of people who are on this webinar right now, on this Zoom call, right? You all are a community of engaged individuals that are making things happen for people experiencing homelessness in your community. And so lean on each other, right? Talk to each other, share with each other. And then this is something you can just think about. We don't have to answer it now. But if all you heard today, think about what stood out to you the most, and how will you adjust your approach to working with people because of it. So I think we're at 11:23. So I'm happy to take any other questions. But Lloyd, that is the end of my presentation.
Very good. Thank you so very much, Michelle. Does anyone have any final questions for Michelle? If you want to raise a hand. Let me share an experience I had in terms of self-care today, and maybe for me it connected to the idea of belonging. And with all of the rain we have been having, I was out walking this morning with an umbrella, but was reminded that each individual raindrop has its own identity, right? Each individual raindrop, and I often think or wonder, how many raindrops does it take to make a gallon of water? But this morning, as I was walking, saw the small rivulets of rainwater flowing down the streets, and realized that as those raindrops fall to the ground, they join with other raindrops to a point where we can't distinguish one raindrop from another, right? They're all part of the stream. And I think in some of my meditations and readings suggest that we also are individual raindrops, as it were, but we come together and we all are participating in the great river of life for 70 or 80 or 100 years, whatever our lifespan might be. And then the river of life keeps flowing, right? We have that sense of history. We have a sense of that life continues. And it is, I think, a worthwhile image to be reminded of, that really all of us and the people that we are serving in our various projects and programs are also part of this great river of life, and we're all experiencing it together. And on some level, we are indistinguishable from each other as we flow into the river of life.
Yeah, that is a really great reflection. I like that a lot.
Thank you.
Because it does indicate how we need to be, somewhat seamless, right? And understand that the connection we have to each other and how we support each other, and how we flow together, right? To make the world a better place.
Right. Anybody have a raised hand or another question, Ruby? Are we good?
I don't see anything right now, but I'll give them a few seconds.
All right, so we are going to
I will send you the PowerPoint.
Very good.
So that you all have it, right, and can share it.
Yep, we'll do that. And
I'm also very available in case anybody has other questions or you want to follow up. Please feel free to reach out. Thank you. You like my chair. So let me just tell you, this is a virtual background. This is not
I was
my house.
wondering whether it's a virtual background or the real background in your home.
I wish this was my home, but
right.
But this is a virtual background. I love it. Yeah, so it made me feel calm. So I was like, maybe it'll help everybody else too.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. We're very grateful.
There's a raised hand from Mary.
Okay, Mary.
Right.
Oh, you went back on mute.
I was wondering right quickly, if someone can give me a quick overview, a rundown of what rapid rehousing really is, how would one qualify for it? What are some of the criterias? I've heard the phrase a lot. I know they assist with can someone just give me a quick overview of it?
Okay, a quick overview, Mary, would be that rapid rehousing projects are specifically for people who are experiencing actual homelessness, whether they're living on the streets or in an emergency shelter. And the goal of the project is to rapidly get them back into a permanent housing situation. Typically, it involves helping them with a housing search and location, helping them make arrangements with a landlord to sign a lease. And it often includes short to medium term rent assistance based on how much the household needs to maintain the housing. And the rent assistance can be from a month or two to up to 2 years. And we don't have projects that are able to provide up to 7 years of assistance in the way that Michelle described in her presentation today, at least with federal sources. Private sources can certainly have more flexibility than with government funding. Hope that helps. Certainly feel free to Google rapid rehousing and you'll have can find more information online.
I will, thank you.
All right.
Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Lloyd.
Thank you, Michelle. We're very grateful for your time and your work and wish you all the best in your good work.
All right.
We'll get together one day.
Yep, exactly. Right.
All right.
I'm going on a multi-state tour after this whole thing. So, all right. Okay. Thank you. Y'all have a good weekend.
You too, Michelle. Bye-bye, everybody. Take care. Thank you, Ruby.